So hi everyone, it's Michelle from MEW Designs, and today I'm making an order for one of my Admiral Grace bags, and I thought I would do a live and go step by step how I make it. So it's inspired by this bag. So I will be doing the turn lock, and on the inside it will have the zipper pocket and the slip pocket. So it's got all the hacks, and it's in some great colors and some great materials. So just finishing setting up my machine. Now it's lots of different colors, so I've gone with a dark gray thread because that will pretty much match everything. So this is the contrast fabric. So this will be the slip pocket. And then this is the lining fabric. So that's the main, and this is the little bit of pop that you'll see over the edge. And then the leather, super cool. So the center panel will be this gorgeous purple. And then for the sides, customer really wanted a chrome tan leather, so a waterproof, slightly hardier one. And I couldn't find the right color. So this is actually a veg tan, and I've applied a sealant to it. So it will act a lot like a chrome tan. So you can see the colors are just going to be so much fun on this. And then to match, I've even got the poppy zipper pull, which I love. So that is from Online Bag Supplies here in Australia. And I think they are the cutest zipper pulls. So trying to sort of keep track of everything at the moment. So I can see there's a couple of people who've joined me. So hi Susan, hi Joni. Great to see you here. Super excited. So I thought I would start on the inside of the bag first. The reason being, for that turn lock connector, I haven't completely decided how I'm going to connect it yet. So sometimes I like to just get started and not panic, not overthink it, just do the bag, do the easy stuff first. I think in my instructions I say do the straps first. I'm ignoring that today. So for the first really easy sew, I'll do the two main panels. Now this is actually a directional print. Might not look like it, but there's a bit of shadow at the bottom of the flowers. So rather than cutting this as one piece, I've cut it in two with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I now need to sew that back together and then press it flat to make this the whole pattern piece. So very disorganized this morning. I'm just gonna get it all set up. So I'll just be using my normal zipper foot most of the time until I go to the leather. Oh, did I say zipper foot? Normal sewing machine foot. I think I need more coffee. Now my sewing machine does have a fancy thing to thread the needle, and I can never get it to work. Just make sure I've caught the bobbin thread. There it is. And because I did sewing at TAFE. Hello Jade. So I don't use clips. It's something that I always forget, that it's a habit that I picked up from learning at TAFE, because production sewing, no needles anywhere near the machines, and pulling pins or clips off takes too much time. So obviously, if you're not comfortable with that, clip the seam up as much as you need. Hopefully, this looks nice and good for everyone. And hopefully my machine's not too loud. Now, at this point, you could take it over to the iron to press it, which you probably should. And I am just going to do a finger press for now. And that should get that sitting nice and flat. So that is that center panel. So the next step will be the slip pocket. So because these side edges get hidden in the seam, you only need to sew top and bottom, which is nice and handy. So again, turn the pocket inside out, or right way round. Remembering, because of the shape on this, the shorter edge is actually the top, which is a bit odd. Now you could change your thread up here. I was thinking about maybe a purple thread, but I'm going to leave it with the grey because I think there's just so much going on in this bag that a nice sort of simple grey thread throughout will just stop it being too much. Again, I'm finger pressing rather than using an iron, which is a terrible habit. Definitely shouldn't do that. So top stitch that top seam. It's just sort of a matter of sliding it down until you find the spot where it matches on both sides. I will use a clip here. So you can see it matches quite well on both sides. Now, we'll sew across the bottom here, and that's what makes the slip pocket. If you're finding it moving a lot and being really difficult, this is where the wash away fabric glue can be great. You can just put a line under there, and it will be just a little bit tacky, but not sort of too much glue. Or because this is fabric, you can pin it in place. So I'll actually pin this one. How's that? The thing with pinning is too, just keep in mind it can make bubbles. So just make sure as you come to where you've pinned it that you really do smooth it out. Again on this, because I haven't pressed it with an iron, I'll just sort of roll it and get it sitting nicely. So on this, you really just want to make sure that it looks nice. You're not going to see the other side, make sure that the top side looks pretty. And try and use the same seam allowance that you used on top, but unless you're brave in using a contrast top stitching, no one's going to notice that too much. So I'll sew this down. I'm going to stitch along the sides so the seam allowance is 1 centimetre, so I want to come just inside that. So there's a 7mm mark on my machine, or even the 5mm mark. I'll just use that just to hold it in place and make sewing those seams a little easier. So Susan has just asked, what interfacing did I use? So it is it's a woven fusible interfacing. Now I get mine here in Australia from Australian bag making supplies. It's called WTF. I always like using a nice woven interfacing. It works well with the fabric. So because they're both woven, it keeps the bias stretch, so the fabric still behaves like fabric. I haven't used anything stiffer in this one because I will be using that leather on the outside, and the veg tan is always a crisper leather. You sort of see the purple that's in the center is quite a soft leather. So this is from Packer Leather. It is the Napa range that they've always got in stock. And this is also Packer Leather, and this is their, I think it's classic veg tan, and it's a lot crisper. So these side panels will be doing a lot of the work to keep the bag propped up. And so I don't actually need a stabilizer or foam or something in there to make the bag sort of stand up. Just stitch in the other side. So a trick on pockets, if you're worried about them gaping, getting all grinny, you can sew in a little on that top stitching line, just 2-3 centimeters, sort of an inch in, and that will actually help stop that pocket from saying hello. On this particular bag, I don't think it really needs it because it narrows in so much, but on some bags, when you're doing slip pockets like this, and they're quite large, they'll open up a lot. So that is slip pocket done. So the next bit is I'm going to put the side panels in most of it because I'm doing that zipper pocket that will actually go across the seam. And I need to remember to also put one of my tags in. I often forget about that. Pocket. I might go down here. So for these, I actually line it up at that 1 centimeter or 3/8 that I'd be sewing the seam at, and I can see that it's too close to the top. I'll just move it back, keeping that edge parallel, and then I go right back. And baste it in. That is that done. So on these, I like to notch once it's all fused, ready to go. So a notch is just a tiny little sort of itty bitty cut. I know on like the patterns that you get from Spotlight and the big box stores, the notches are giant triangles like that. All you need is just a tiny little clip so that you can see it, and that way it's not interfering with any of your sewing. It's just a notation, a marking just something that you can see. I'll do that on both of these. And I don't need to notch the center panel because I have a seam right where it's going. I'm only going to put essentially half of this in because I want this side sitting flat for when I put the zipper in. If I sewed the whole thing in, I'd be working inside the bag and it's really, really tricky. So on these, when you're matching up the seams, always, well, this applies to just about everything. Remember that you're not sewing on that raw edge. You're actually sewing where the seam allowance is. So in about 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter here. So I'm not going to match these two edges. I'm going to match where I stitch. I will put a clip there. And then it can be easier where they're curved bits like this to use a pin rather than a clip. Look, I'll actually clip this. So where you've got curves, you have ease. And what that really means is you're stitching here, but you've got a little bit of extra fabric and there's more curve there. So it's going to be a bit extra on this side. You want to, again, just make sure at that stitch line that that's where things are meeting up. It's less tricky on this straight side seam. There won't really be ease there. It is only around the corners. And I think ease is so tricky because you are having a lot of faith in the pattern maker that they've done it right. Which luckily, it's my pattern, so I know I have. You can see it's a little bit of extra there, but it's not a whole lot. And I know that that's the center on both. So, sew that up. This can be where it's handy to have something to help feed fabric under. So pick this up somewhere along the lines, and sometimes I will just use a trusty screwdriver as well, just to, I don't like getting my fingers too close to the needle. You can also use a pin for feeding stuff through. That was what the amazing machinist at TAFE taught us to do. That is one side in. You can see, got the tag sitting nicely with a thread through, of course. Looking good. And now I will do the other side. So same thing. That center notch lines up with the base. Put a pin through there. And again on this top, you do want that little bit of overlap because you will be starting your stitching there. So you can see from this other side sort of what's happening, that there's extra fabric there and it's a bit tighter here. And this is where you sort of have to ease that in. I'm just going to sew that in. And now I have that prepared for doing the zipper. Now I actually will iron this time. Hate ironing, but it is absolutely worth it to get these seams sitting flat and make sure that the zip is level, because if it's not level, it looks terrible. So let me quickly do that. Maybe even able to spin the camera around. Although ironing's not very interesting, is it? It can help to use a tailor's ham or something with a little bit of curve on these seams, because they aren't just straight flat seams. So that's the seam sitting very nicely. I'm going to do a slightly different approach to the zipper. I'm going to use a facing. So it's an extra step, but I think it can look really nice. So I've got a piece of the lining fabric, and then I'm going to use this print on the inside of the pocket. So I've got two nice big rectangles of that. A really handy tool, if you can ever find them, are these zipper templates. So I got mine from Deadly Mojo Sewing. It's here in Australia, but I'm not sure if Kiralee is selling these at the moment, but I've seen plenty of others. They can be just a lifesaver when it comes to putting zippers in, because it's a perfect box, and with all the markings you can line it up. You don't need one, but it's just a tool that's actually worth investing in. So I start by folding. I prefer folding to finding center lines. It's just, so that's my center. I did cut the pocket pieces out using this as a template, so it should fit in nicely. And I might go just shorter. So that gives me my zipper window. I'd say this is the trickiest part about putting a zipper into an Admiral Grace because it's all curves. What I have been doing is measuring down from these two lines, and it can also help to put that center fold in to help line things up. You can go all the way down to the base and crease that. You can always iron creases out afterwards. And so again, this is where that crease works on here. Now, with placement of the zipper, I know I've put it in the instructions. I don't have the instructions in front of me, but if you're ever wanting to put a zipper in a pattern, just have a think through. So with this, because it has that overlap, so that's 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, I know I need to be down at least 3 centimeters. So I would probably go down 5 centimeters. So on this tool, I'm just going to move it off the machine. Hopefully you can still see. It does need to be nice and flat. I'll take the table off. Didn't clean under there before, did I? So using the crease, I can keep it centered. I'll lay this one out and I will pin it in. I might just see on this bag. Yeah, might drop it just a little bit lower. And what I will do, I actually will measure down. So I measure down along the seam to the top of the zipper box on one side and make sure it's the same on this one. It's pretty close to spot on. I will use more pins than I normally would in getting this to sit flat, but that is because it does have a bit of curving to it. Just make sure I'm happy with that. Okay. One more. For sewing in zipper pockets, I like to start a good distance away from the corners, because the corners are going to be your tricky bit and the areas that have sort of the most pulling on them. I like to backstitch at the corners just to give a little bit of extra strength. And it also helps, not so much on this machine, but some machines, when you're turning corners, they like to skip the stitch if you don't have the needle in the perfect position. So by going back, you can make sure that it's caught that stitch. Another thing with the zipper boxes is if you count the number of stitches on one side, if you remember, you can try and put the same number of stitches on the other side, and you know your zipper box is going to be fairly accurate then. And I'm not quite to the top of the zipper box on this one, so I am just going to manually do it. Back stitch, make that corner. Hello, Marilyn. Good to see you. It's really odd explaining what I'm doing as I'm going, rather than just like doing it. I think I completely forgot to say too, just make sure that your seams at the back are sitting flat. Doesn't matter too much, it just helps it stop getting too bulky over those seams. It's not quite in the right spot, so I'll adjust it and then go back and forward. And I've forgotten how many stitches, so it's a great tip if you can remember. So that is the zipper box in. Now, as always, the terrifying step of cutting a hole in something that's looking perfectly good. Now, you can, of course, draw your line in the center and mark your corner notches. I'm pretty sure that's a key step in the pattern, but of course, I don't do that. Make sure you're not cutting anything else like I almost did then. And you want to get right in as close as possible to those corners without going through the stitches. And a way I like to check how it's going to sit is pull it out like that. If it will sit straight like that, usually it's a fairly good sign that you'll be able to get nice corners. Rinse and repeat on the other side. I think clipping in close is one of the hardest things to sort of get your head around when you're first starting, because it just seems so terrifying. And I like to finger press on each of these. And even sometimes I will use the iron as well. Just start encouraging it and then roll that seam. As if you can get as much done by hand and it's sitting well, it makes it easier when you do take it over to the iron. I'm just going to use the fancy app on my phone to turn the iron on so I don't have to stand up. I have to work out if I can easily spin the camera around and show the ironing as well in the video. I'm using an app, so I could probably, I know I can switch between cameras. But yeah, again, if you finger press first, sort of work all those corners. On the corners of the zipper pocket, you're always going to have a little bit of like a scrunchy bit. The trick is to make sure that it's on the inside and not on the outside. It's always worth working it and just making sure that the front is looking all nice. So I might start ironing that. Did the police siren just come up on the audio by any chance? I live on a bit of a busy street, not far from a police station. Now, usually they don't have their sirens on, but they seem to have excellent timing for whenever I'm recording a video. So, thanks for letting me know. I have been looking at getting some soundproofing to try and help with that. Okay. So, zip zipper window is in. So I'm using some zipper tape. I like to melt the ends, or you can use fray stopper or some other sort of glue, because zippers will fray. Whenever you cut zipper tape, glue, do something. I had a bag once where I'd notched and the entire zipper frayed, and it actually fell out. It frayed that badly. So whenever you're cutting zipper tape, always seal the ends off. And melting stuff's fun. I always have the lighters around because I use bonded nylon thread on the industrial machines, and it's great for just melting those threads. Now, for holding the zipper in place while you're sewing it in, I don't recommend pins because they'll make wobbly, lumpy bits. So again, the wash away glue can be great, and it will activate a little bit if you iron on top of it. If you put a bit more heat, it gets even tackier. So that can be good, that you can put your zipper in, put a little bit of heat next to it, never on the teeth, you can melt them and make it extra tacky. I like using double-sided tape. So this is Kikasuki. It's a Japanese brand. It's for paper, for mounting prints and things. So you can get it from some packing suppliers, and then you can also get it from picture framers and places like that. The reason that I love it is that you can tear it. You don't have to cut it. So that's why I always have a roll of it at the machine. I can just pick it up, use it. I don't even have to find scissors. But in using double-sided tape, some sewing machines absolutely hate sewing through it and will throw a complete tantrum. So just be careful. Try not to sew the tape itself. And if you are sewing it, I think you can get needles that don't glom up as much. Oh, I can hear another siren. What I like to do. This is a good step to also make sure, if you're using zipper tape, that you've got a zipper pull on the zipper tape. Sounds so obvious, but the number of times, it's totally recoverable. It's just a little bit frustrating. So I kind of line it up. I cut the zipper to the same width as all the bits that I'm using, so that makes it nice and easy for me. And I like to start at these ends and center the zipper tape. Everyone will have a different sort of preference for how they like doing, placing it and getting the best look. I think the biggest thing is just go nice and slowly, adjust it as it needs it. Don't race. This is a step where the time you spend sort of getting it looking good, it'll pay off with the finished product. So you could change thread at this point and do something if you had something to match, but I'm going to stick with the grey because I think it will blend in nicely and it saves me having to change thread. So again, don't start too close to the corners, and this is where counting those steps over the end, like counting the number of stitches over the end, really comes in handy because this is where it gets seen. So that way you can try and make sure that your box is even on both sides. Right. Even change to a narrower foot. So remember going over the zipper teeth hand wheel, well, because you just want as much control as possible. Hand wheel, you can also feel if it's getting a bit thick. You can feel the needle if it's going to hit anywhere. Move the zipper pull out of the way. It's always going to give you a little bit of a wobbly bit. This should be 7 stitches. Six and a half maybe. So that is the zipper in. The next step is on the inside. Just sewing one of the lining pieces in, so I shall clip it. This is where it can be handy to have a zipper foot on. So Susan, for top stitch, I use 3. So I tend to, on this machine, mostly range from 2.5 to 3, depending on what I'm stitching. And we'll mostly leave it at 3 unless there's a really good reason to have a smaller stitch width. On Faffy, it has a maximum of 5, and so I tend to use that. And then I try and keep Beastie at 5 because then it matches Faffy. But there's no particular reason behind that. I think a lot of that is just personal preference. So I'm going to sew the zipper facing to the lining, the zipper pocket lining, and I'm going to get in as close as possible to that line of stitching, because then it makes everything just about invisible, which is why the zipper foot can be handy. And I sew all the way from the edge across, and you'll see when you're doing this, you'll see a little pull of the corner of the zipper pocket. There's another siren. That was an unmarked police car. That's different. So I'm going to sew across. I'm going to get in nice and close to the corner of the zipper box, and then just in as close to that seam as I can, and I'll attach that zipper pocket lining. And just fold it back and get in as close as you can without actually sewing. Which, if happens, isn't the worst thing. You can definitely unpick a few stitches and steam it, recover from it. Let's move the zipper out of the way. So you can see by doing that, you can just see the zipper box line of stitching, but it's mostly hidden. And it just gives it a bit of a neater finish. Probably could have actually gone in closer there. And I think I might. That's why it's always good to have a check as you go, because you can easily correct things. Because all this stitching's on the inside of the bag, nobody knows. So that's that side. And then rinse and repeat on the other side. Again, when you're starting to get quite a few pieces like this, just make sure that you know where all your pieces are and that you sort of give it a double check and that things aren't getting caught up underneath, because that is very easy to do. You can make the facing a lot smaller. I made it nice and large so it would show up well on the video. squeeze the zipper in nicely. So this step, you will have a longer side if you've cut both rectangles the same size, because top and bottom of the zipper. I do a really rough trim. This does not have to be perfect. Now, I do pull out these sides just to make them sit as flat as possible. Just sometimes it will like pull up a bit, so just pull it down nicely. And I can see I'm a little bit out here, but you'll never actually notice that inside. Now, to remember to leave the turning gap for you need to stop sewing, I like to use pins because my brain always thinks, why on earth have you put a pin in? And I'm going to leave a really generous turning gap. I will be glad of that. So you don't need to stitch across the top because that's already in. It's the two sides. Small clips. Again, just keep in mind where your bag is. I might go back to a normal foot. The zipper foot can be great, but one of the difficulties of it is because it's narrower, it's not sitting over both the feed dogs, so it can make your feet a little bit uneven. I'm going to use the centimetre seam allowance here. And I'm going to curve slightly around the corners because that just is nicer. It stops gunk and grit getting in the corners of the pocket. I just sort of freestyle that. There's no particular measurement. Again, just tucking all of that, making sure I'm not going to accidentally sew over it. And hand wheel over the zipper teeth if the zipper's poking out. And the same for the other side. And the last step that I'll do on this one is use some pinking shears and trim off a whole lot of this at the top. And that's mostly because of the way this bag sits. Usually I wouldn't worry too much, but it's just going to make it sit nicer. Oh, I sewed that the wrong way, but it's still going to work. So I don't even need to trim the top there because it's nicely pulled down. That's handy. Maybe I should write my patterns like that. Or is it? No. I have made that a mistake there, so join me for some unpicking. I can find my thread trimmers. Luckily, it's only the side seams inside a pocket. my last trick for thread picking is lint roller to get all the threads up. It's usually pretty good for getting the little ones. You can just pull the big ones out. I usually don't get too stressed about getting everything because I will do a final check, sort of my quality control step is to go through and check for threads and tie things off. So, all right. Let's try that again. So my pocket's now going to be shorter. That's okay. Still a big pocket. Same thing again. You can see this end was pulling up quite a bit there. I'm just going to make sure that that's pulled down. Double check on this side. Trim a little more. And in at the start and stop. Points. Triple check that it is the right way around. And let's do this all again. Better. These are my blunt pinking shears. They are. Okay. That's the pocket. So I will finish the rest of the side seams on the lining. So again, at those corners, you're not matching the edges, you're matching where you'll actually stitch. And this is where it helps to have tacked that slip pocket in. It sits nicely in the seam. Again, you'll need to go around the corner. See that should sit pretty nicely when I sew it. This is where I like to turn it inside out and give it a really good check. Make sure that I don't have puckers, that slip pocket sitting well. Zip is all in nicely. That is my lining done. doing this with the turn lock. So I might sew up that piece next. Now, my dilemma is because I'm using leather, I'm actually thinking of cutting into the leather at the back and pushing the piece in and then sewing over the top and riveting, because I think it's going to give it a much cleaner finish than trying to fold the leather in like you would do for fabric. So I might sew it up, keep thinking about it, and then sew up the outside. I'm going to use this machine to sew the main seams because it will sew, it's got the 1 centimeter seam allowance so that I can easily see. I think I might move to one of the industrials after that. I'm thinking I might see if I can move everything over to the cylinder arm. I think that's probably the more fun machine. So the choices are, it's the Faffy, the cylinder arm, or Beast, the Singer. So if anyone's got any preferences, let me know. Otherwise, I will sew these up while I keep thinking it over. And this is all the stuff that I really should have planned from the beginning, but I never do. I will also change to a Teflon foot now that I'm moving to leather. These machines do have a walking foot. I just never loved it, and it sounds like it's falling apart when you use it. It's kind of a little bit terrifying. So I will stick to my trusty Teflon foot. I wonder what seam allowance I did that at. Oh, that's a centimeter. For leather, I do like doing a second line of stitching around because it helps stop it grinning. I do that. At TAFE, it was always called a pin width, so you want to go nice and close, but not so close that you risk sort of making a perforation line. trim out the bulk, especially around any curves. This is where using chopsticks or something fine but not too pointy can be really good in turning things through. Screwdrivers aren't so great. They can get a little bit pokey and actually poke through stitching, which is never good. This is going to have the flip lock. So that will look quite nice. So it will need a top stitch. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to pop it in my cool ironing press, because that will give it a bit of weight sitting on top and help get that fold in nicely. I just need to find my other UGG boot. Typical Queenslander, we don't have proper heating and we get lots of drafts through the house, so I spend most of my day in UGG boots, but I like sewing on the dukey barefoot. So I end up losing one of my Uggies. Right. Now, the same way that I did on the lining, I'm going to put a notch on my leather pieces. Again, just tiny, tiny little itty bitty snip. Just has to be enough that you can see it. And again, clip those notches together. in most Wonder clips, if you go all the way sort of in, that's about 3/8 or 1 centimeter. It's quite a handy little trick because then you're actually clipping on the stitch line. But keeping in mind that they can mark some leathers. They've got the little teeth. And sometimes at the base. I'll put a few in together because it sort of wants to move. It's not as sort of flexible and easy as the fabric. That's why it can be nice starting with the lining. Hi. Hello, Robin. Lovely to see you here. I do like to use a few more clips when it comes to leather. It's just means that I know everything's in place, and because with leather that you really don't want to unpick, it leaves holes in it. So I don't mind going a bit slower. That's one side seam in. So I've got the Teflon foot on the machine. I'm going to sew this first line round at 1 centimeter, 3/8 seam allowance. Now, it can be a bit difficult sometimes starting and taking off with leather. You'll find that your foot dips, and that's where hump jumpers are absolutely wonderful. I've got 2 different types here, or even just the box that the needles come in. I've been known to put my screwdriver underneath. And the idea is you want to keep that foot horizontal because you've got the feed dogs underneath and you want even pressure on both sides. On this one, it's only a little bit out, so I'm going to use a not so high side of that. And then the other trick can be, don't start right on the edge. Come in maybe 3 or 4 stitches, go forward, and then go backwards. And that way it stops it unevenly feeding. I'm just finding it's slipping a little bit, so I'm going to increase the pressure of the foot. That should help it feed a little better. Again, just go super slow on these bits. Just keep track of both sides of the leather, a few stitches at a time, stop, adjust. It's not a race. It's all about just getting a good finish. And you probably will have to move the leather around a fair bit. And again, use a pokey thing, a screwdriver, and just work that leather around. as you get to the base, it's also great to have a check at that point to make sure that your notches are still lined up. So that'll let you know that everything's going well. I can see mine are, so hooray. The nice thing about this is once you've gotten around that bottom corner curve, it's kind of like, you know, it's good sailing from there. Like, yeah, tricky parts out of the way. So that is one side in. And then it's rinse and repeat on the other side. Find the notch. There. And match those two itty bitty notches together. I am thinking might move to the cylinder arm. It can be a little bit of a pain sometimes. It does like to misbehave with the bobbin every so often, but I think the cylinder arm will be more fun to sew on. And if I do decide to do the encased seams on the side of this, I think it will just do a much better job of that. And I'll run some test pieces through first to see what sort of mood it's in. It's also an easier machine sometimes because I upgraded the motor on it to a servo motor, so it means I can do one stitch at a time, and I've got a needle positioner on it, so it means that the needle stops in the down, whereas on Beast I still got the clutch, so the needle just stops wherever, and even when you take your foot off the pedal, it keeps on sewing. Haha. Okay, cylinder arm it is. The main reason that I'm sewing these first stitches on the machine is that the pattern is drafted at that 1 centimeter 3/8, and this machine has those markings on it. The industrials that I have don't have a plate with markings on them, and the feet are narrower. So when I'm making patterns just for me, I actually do a narrower seam allowance that matches the sewing machine. But it means for patterns that I've drafted, it's easier for me to sew it on this machine first because then I know I'm using the right seam allowance. So Susan, I will put the second line on, but I'm going to do that on the other machine because I feel like that's a really good warm-up on the cylinder arm. It's going to let me check the tension's good, that the machine's happy, but that's all on the inside and not on a seam that matters. And so then when I'm doing top stitching or seams on the outside, I will have had that confidence. Faffy can be faffy some days. It's a lovely, lovely machine. It can just be a bit of a pain. Oh, something went wrong there. I'm not sure what that was about. The bobbin looks okay. There's actually some thread looped up. Well, that will be why it made displeased sounds. I'm just going to quickly lift this up and make sure that there's not any other thread or anything caught underneath. This is the fun part about lives. I don't get to edit out all these bits to see real sewing in action. So that looks all clear. You get to know your machines after a while, and just you can hear when they're not quite right, which is handy, especially if you don't have a computerized machine that tells you what's wrong. I'm not sure what happened there. It might have just been a long thread got caught around the bobbin case. Let me get my tail out. Bobbin in. Catch that. Now, I usually have little scraps lying around. All the extra bits that I took off the pocket. Yep, it's happy again. All right, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky because you sort of think, oh, I've got holes in there. What am I going to do? First thing is that this will be hidden because it's that 1 centimeter. There'll be fabric over the top, so nobody will see it. And the other thing is just line up your needle so it sits through the same hole and go back and try and slowly hand wheel and adjust it to get in the same holes again, and nobody will ever know that anything happened. So what I do is I lift the foot up and adjust and get the needle where I want it. And all recovered. Again, nice and slow around the corners, just a few stitches at a time, and keep adjusting it. You'll have a lot of extra here. Just keep moving that through, and you almost want to swing it underneath. that is my first row of stitching sewn in. So what I might do, so I'm going to turn the camera off while I move it, because I think it might be a lot of all over the place if I leave the camera on, and might get a bit wobbly. So let me turn that off. So Susan, I'll answer this while I'm moving things about the thread. So I am using Roseanne thread on the Juki for both leather and woven, mostly because that's what my machine prefers. It really likes Roseanne. The Juki gets really fussy if I put anything else in it. But on the industrial machines, I use a bonded nylon, and it's because it's what they like. It's also good with leather. I haven't had any problems with Roseanne, but I know some people don't think that it's a good one to use. I think at the end of the day, use what's good for your machine and what makes your machine happy. This is the unwieldy part. I'm moving a tripod. Oh, Marilyn, a coffee. I have an iced coffee now. I made it. I didn't drink it. I definitely need the second camera set up so you can see me shuffling things around, because I'm sure it would be quite entertaining to watch. Okay, let's try that and see how it works. Can get a bit tricky with the cylinder arm to sort of not be in the way and like I need a charger for my laptop. Poor old thing doesn't have much battery in it anymore. I think that would be a disaster if the laptop battery failed. Susan, just seen your question. Not nosy at all. I love the questions because they're things that I just do without thinking. So it's great when you ask because then it's like, aha. So I just use a universal needle for everything. I don't change to a leather needle. Well, and that's in the Juki. It's just, I have leather needles. So one tricky part with leather needles is that they're a lot more delicate because they have a thinner sort of part just above where the eye of the needle is. So going over zipper teeth, I'd be really cautious if you're using a leather needle on that. Obviously on this bag we don't have that problem, but sort of something I always like to remind people. On the industrials, I do use a leather needle, and that's really because all I sew on them is leather. So I just buy leather needles and that's what stays in them. But the Juki gets a little bit of everything thrown at it. Although in saying that, I don't do much stretch on the Juki. If I'm doing stretch, I've got a Bonina that I use, so because it does the fancy stitches, whereas the Juki is a straight stitch only machine. The laptop is plugged in, so we're not going to have low battery panic. Myself all sorted. Now, what colour do I have in? So because I'm going to sew, get this in frame, the little oh, I don't have the words, but this will be one of the first things that I sew. I'll put purple on top. I need to decide whether I do grey. I think that green's too light, so I'm going to do grey. I should have some grey bobbins already, which is helpful. No, I do not. Unless that's in there. Haha, grey's already in there. So one of the downsides to this machine is that it does have quite small bobbins. I'll grab one of the bobbins from Beastie just to show the size difference between what are essentially two very similar industrial machines. So you sort of see there, might be a bit blurry, but sort of double the capacity in one of the large bobbins. So it can be a little frustrating because it tends to run out of bobbin thread a lot faster, but the win is that it means this little post is a lot smaller, because you can imagine fitting a bigger bobbin in, they actually have to have a larger post. So like with everything with industrial machines, it's a bit of a compromise. I got my cold coffee, Marilyn. Oh, and it's good. Yeah, the flap. Thank you, Susan. I think I've just talked so much that my brain is like frozen a little bit. So let's get her threaded with the purple. So that's a really nice match, that purple. It's going to look good. I always feel like contrast stitching is just asking for trouble. So Susan Beastie is a singer. So it's a 411U. So it's a single needle, but in that series, they're all built to do double needles, which is kind of cool. And I got it, it was absolutely filthy. It had been in a shed, but it looked like it had gone through a flood. But because it was dirty, I got it for a very good price and just spent a couple of days cleaning it up. It was well worth it. I'm going to pull out. I'll have to do another live where I sew on Beastie as well. Although it's really loud, so I might have to make sure I've got like a good microphone on. Sometimes I can get it through the needle and other times I can't. And I'm going to check how much is in the bobbin. Oh, it's almost a full bobbin. Good. Okay. So I always like to do just some stitches, hand wheeling at first, just to get a feel for the machine before I even turn the motor on, just to make sure that it's feeling good, it's feeling happy. Sometimes you can even tell that it needs oiling. I can get slack on that. And see, it's a little bit unbalanced on the stitches. Probably need to increase my top tension slightly, but it's sewing well, it felt well. So I'll turn it on. This one's silent, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to do that second line of stitching now next to the line that I did on the Juki. I won't start all the way at the top. I like to come down sort of 2-3 centimeters, about an inch, and then do the line of stitching. It just means if you're trying to get the top to sit flat, you can actually open the seam out. So let's see how she goes. This is where cylinder arms are great because you can just get that curve sitting really nicely. And she looks like she's stitching really well. So that is the second line of stitching. So I can have a good look at it and just make sure that I'm happy with the balance. I don't need to adjust the tension, but it's looking really nice. which is always good. So let's do the other side. So if you don't have a piece of sewing sitting behind, if you haven't chained, make sure you hold the tails when you start sewing, particularly on machines like this. If you don't hold on to those tails and put just that little bit of tension in, it can, on that first thread, depending on sort of what's going on, you can end up with a loop around the bobbin, and then that just causes a big knotty mess. And it can actually throw out timing if it really goes badly. So always hold on to the tails if there's no extra little bit. I'm about to lose my snips. I've got a magnet up here that's so handy for holding everything because I just put things down and lose them otherwise. That is that extra line of stitching on both sides. So it should stop any grinning. And that does look like it's sitting really nicely inside there. So I'm going to hang that off the back. Let's give this a go. And I feel like if anything, this will be what Beastie gets a little fussy about. Doesn't always love fabric. So this machine was set up for binding. So it's a little bit different to some of the other machines in that it doesn't have feed dogs. It just moves backwards and forwards rather than up and down. And there's a little gap in the front and back, and if you're not using really stiff leather, things can get caught in that gap, particularly where there's sort of a jump up or a jump down. So you do have to be a little bit careful. It really gets me on the purses that I've been doing. I have a sample somewhere, but there's one point in them where there's an edge underneath, and so I have to be really careful and get the point out and feed it through. But these are all things of, if you're buying secondhand machines, you don't always get the pick of exactly what you want. But it means I can have a couple of machines for the price of one brand new deluxe machine. So I'll start this one off by hand, again, just to get a feel for how the machine's behaving. It seems to be okay, so just check as I go. Does look like need to increase tension just a little bit. It's not really, the tension's not too bad out. I just like to adjust as I go. Now, even though this machine will do a stitch at a time, on bits like this, I still like using the hand wheel, particularly when I'm using the treadle. So this machine has a treadle that's the foot up and down, and then a treadle for go and stop. And I always look down to make sure I'm on the right one. I'd rather not risk it, if you don't want to accidentally think you're using the foot up and down treadle and make it go. Okay. And see, the tension went a little bit funny there. Sometimes with the foot, if you lift the foot all the way up, it releases the tension disc. So when I'm maneuvering stuff, I'm trying to just lift it enough to move stuff without releasing the tension. Sometimes you just go too high. But you can sometimes adjust it a little bit. But on the whole, I'm quite happy with that. And of course, because I'm putting a turn lock in, now that I've done this and I'm happy with it, I'm going to cut a hole in it. I think I will cut a hole in the bag. That's the width of this, feed it in, and stitch across. Because I think it's just going to look nice having that. And then the last question is, do I want to do encase seams on this or not? Coming together quite well. So with the leather, a fair bit of it is just working the leather as well, getting it to sit right. in particular on this one, the veg tan, you can work veg tan a lot more. It will crease really nicely. Whereas the purple, it's a much softer napper, which is gorgeous. It just means it's not as crisp. I'm not sure if I want to encase these things. The other tricky part with the encased seams is that you'll obviously see the stitching on the green. I think the grey is just a bit boring. The next step for me Susan, that's good to hear. It's cutting a hole in the back, and then I'm going to feed this through, and then same sort of way that you do the strap connectors. Stitch across and put some rivets in. I'll explain it. It's really, really quite simple. On the side seams, measure down, I've been using about 5 centimeters, and you stitch right along this edge, and it holds the seam, and it gives a really unusual sort of direction change in the bag and does change its shape. Just keep working. So you can see, there's a bit of a lag on YouTube, so I just have to flick back between it and the app that I've got all the video streaming set up in. So you can see that working the leather does make a big difference with how it sits, and then that will also help how it sews. So this is one of those steps that takes a little bit of time. Yeah, it's exactly like a French seam, but I don't take it all the way to the top. Let me, while I'm working on this, because it's really not that exciting, I'll go get the other one. So it starts at about here, whereas if you're doing a proper French seam, you take it all the way up. But I was trying to reduce as much bulk as possible the original concept behind this pattern was I wanted a bag that you could make in leather in a class of people that had domestic machines. So then it became the challenge of how do I remove as much bulk as I possibly can? And it's always in this top seam where things are bulky. So by starting lower, you can trim and it's not double layers of anything, and it makes it a lot easier to get that nice final top stitching in. And then essentially you French seam the whole way round, and it gives this really cool shaping in the base of the bag, which I loved. It just helps with that directional shift. I get it in the nice light, but it still works without it. It's not something essential. I just sort of did it when I was developing the pattern. I sort of just had the idea one day of, oh, I want to try and see how this works, and it looked really cool. Even without it, it's still a really lovely shape. Because this veg tan is crisp, for these corners, if I'm going to encase it, you can see maybe here, there's a little sort of pokey bit. That's where it's sort of puckered and gathered on the inside. So I would definitely trim some of the green leather back. If you don't want those, yeah, it's almost on the same spot on each side. There's just like a chunky lump that definitely would want to trim out. So if I move, I wonder if I can cut it here. Working the leather is also an excellent procrastination about cutting holes in things. Is that something that I should pop on camera? Maybe putting the turn lock in and how I do it, and then putting the turn lock on the body and putting the flap in? I feel like that's like asking for trouble of like doing live cutting holes in leather of a bag that you've almost finished. It's sort of asking for something to go terribly wrong. Once I've done those two and decided if I'm doing the seam detail, then it's the homeward stretch of popping the lining in and top stitching, which is kind of exciting. I'm going to trim out the green of the seam. So I have to wander off and find some scissors. You can see, get it into the light, these are the puckers. So this is what will make bouncy, like lumpy spots. So I'm going to trim quite close to the stitch line around this curve. So same as making clothes, clip around the curve. And you can see it's not on the purple side at all. It's only on the green. So I'm not going to trim the purple. So that's taking it in a lot closer. I shall do the same on the other side. And why not? Let's do the seams. It is what the customer saw, so I always find it nerve-wracking, like when you've got the bag to almost finished, that you start doing these extra things, and every extra thing might be where it all goes wrong. Let's do it. Definitely, this is one of those steps where it does pay to be accurate. Sometimes you can get away with fudging it a bit, but you want to start and finish the seams at the same point, because otherwise it's just going to look visually really odd. I like about 5 centimeters down, because it gives it a little bit of room. And the way that I like to do it is use a pin and put the pin actually in the stitching. The other way to do it is to put masking tape or some other sort of really delicate tape in and actually tape across. But again, if you get this wrong, you can add a stitch in by hand afterwards, so it's not like if this doesn't work, it's all over and you've ruined the bag. You can definitely recover from it. This is again where I will check and make sure that I have plenty of bobbin thread. Anything with top stitching, you want to check for bobbin thread. Still looking good. Got plenty of thread up top. That's looking good. I'm going to get a nice generous bit of tail, because then I can use the needle if I need to and fix it up. Oh, so here goes. then I'm going to hold the tail, turn the machine on. On this, I'm not going to backstitch because I will come back later and use the holes that the needle's already punched and thread the thread through and then bring it all through to the one side and melt just a spot together. Okay. That is one side. You can really see the difference that adding that in makes, how it does that sort of cool directional change. So, Susan, the seam allowance for this, I don't remember what I wrote in the pattern. I'm sewing at, I think, 4, 5 mil. It's just based on the foot on this machine, so 1/8 of an inch. Yeah, I think the outside of the foot's 1/4 of an inch, the inside's 1/8 of an inch. It's a little bit uneven in the way that the foot sits. But for something like this, because it's not structural, it doesn't matter so much what your seam allowance is, so long as you're consistent on both sides. It's sort of like the top stitching on a zip. It doesn't matter really where that top stitching is, so long as it's the same on both sides. Whereas the internal seam where you're joining it together. That first one really, really matters because of that curve, and the two measurements need to be like exactly the same. Like, it's hard at first getting to know when it matters, when you do actually have to follow the seam allowance and when you've got a little bit more leeway with it. Again, I'm just going to rinse and repeat on the other side. 5 centimeters down, chuck a pin in. Masking tapes are really good for marking stuff on leather too. I do that on the top handle on the Jerry. I've got some masking tape that's 25 millimeter 1 inch, and so I can actually wrap that around the ends, and I know that I'm consistently then 1 inch away. So it's often about finding little hacks like that that just make your sewing life easier, or hearing about them from people that have worked it out for themselves, which is, I think, the great thing about having our little sewing community is that everyone can share. So now I'm going to do it on the other side. Again, hold the tails. Do these first couple of stitches by hand. This is where having worked the leather first really, really helps getting a nice crisp edge. That is the other side done. And this is where I eyeball it. Make sure that they look like they're sitting about the same. Doesn't have to be perfect, so long as it looks good. And then up here, I should have a needle. Just using one of the holes. Pull the ends through. Make sure that I'm happy that that's going to hold. Trim them back. And then this is the really fun part, to burn stuff. And then sometimes I'll even flatten it down, and that's the ends taken care of. Probably can't see it on camera. So it's really interesting sewing the veg tan because it leaves more of a punched hole. So Susan, when I turn it off, it's generally, if I'm towards the end and I know I'm going to hand stitch, I turn it off. And that habit's not from this machine. That habit is from using machines with a clutch motor, because with the clutch motor, even though the machine's turned off, it can still stitch. And so I turn it off as soon as I can to try and let some energy out of the motor. And it's also, yeah, just a bit of a habit. I prefer, if my hands are super close to the machine, to have it turned off. And for this machine, I've got the foot treadle set up so that when I put my heel back on it, it just lifts the needle up. But on my clutch machines, when you slam your heel down on the foot pedal at the back of it, it actually stops the machine from sewing. So it's a little bit of a safety thing on this machine and habit from other machines. Don't learn my bad habits. I think the turning the machine off is a taste habit too. The teachers just much preferred if you weren't using a machine, but you had it turned off because it just reduced the risk of injury. I love getting questions like that because it really makes me think, like, why am I doing it? Where does that habit come from? And is it something I want to keep doing, or is it a habit I want to change? Yeah. Sometimes it's good habits, sometimes bad habits. I was very lucky. The main sewing teacher at TAFE had extensive experience and was also very keen on safety. I think she'd seen some bad things happen, so she gave us lots of tips and tricks and hints and would pull people up when they were doing unsafe things. And I think having someone like that just makes you a better machinist. Like, I always look at the treadle because Carol used to sing a song about looking at the treadle before putting your feet on it, particularly when we were doing stretch sewing, because the cover stitches were slightly different, and she'd get so sick of people not looking and stuffing the machines up. So she would sing a song. So that is the difference that it makes doing those side ones. I'm glad I did it, as traumatic and stressful as it is. It looks really good. The next step is turn lock and the flap. I might see if I can do it here. I'll go get all my bits and pieces and then come back, because that will be probably easier than moving the camera. I don't know how I'll go for the actual turn lock part. but let's give it a go. Okay. So there's two parts to this. I need to install the little flip lock part. And then I also need to have that going in. Now, I did notice when I was sewing it, there's actually a mark in the leather there. So I might bury it inside just below that. It's that way that's hidden out of sight, nobody needs to know. Have a look at the sample one I did. So on this one, that's about 3 centimeters down. I might pop this one 4 centimeters down. I think that will just look slightly better. Now, when it comes to pens for marking leather, you can get quite cheap ones from China. But I've also found for a lot of the chrome tans that the gel pens, like the hybrid gel pens, can work quite well. But the trick is always test it first and make sure that it comes off, and it does. You can see, may or may not be able to see, I've already cut the holes for the connectors, and you can see that the red has actually stained it, but that will sit underneath the strap connectors, so nobody will ever know. This will be where I need a little bit of extra chopping board. So if you ever get these little itty bitty healing mats, they are absolutely fantastic for situations like this, where I'm wanting to cut a hole in a bag that's made up. I can put it in between, and I've also got, these are chopping boards that I use as stabilizers in between stuff. So that's another layer that I can use, and that way I'm making sure that I'm just cutting a hole on one side and not the other. So I would be most upset to cut through both. That's been known to happen. So I'm going to measure this across. It is just over 6 centimeters. So the good thing is we know that that stitching starts and stops at 5 centimeters. going to go for about 4 centimeters, 3 centimeters wide, so about 6 centimeters rather. So my grading ruler is 5 centimeters wide, so I just need a centimeter on each side of that. I can square it up nicely. Just going to adjust my line a bit because it's dropped on one side. So with my trusty chopping board, cut a hole across. Oh, I wonder if I should edge paint that. I think it would look a little bit better with some edge paint. Let me go get my edge paint. So I do have some lovely colours coming. They just haven't arrived yet. So I'm using some Feebling's Neutral because this leather is dyed all the way through. It's a consistent colour. So the neutral one does a pretty good job of just giving it a little bit of pop. I've got some of the iridescent awesome stuff coming, so I can't wait to actually use that on some projects. I am also just straight out coating this. I'm not putting a base layer or anything like that on. Which I'm sure is breaking all the rules of edge painting, but that's okay. I just want it to look good. The edge coat that I've got coming that I'm really, really excited about is from Inklings and the Kraken. So Jodie's now the official, I'm not going to be able to say the Italian name properly, the Giandini, help. The nice brand that everyone loves where you get the set with all the different colours. So I have some of that coming. It's just being held hostage by Australia Post. It went to Red Bank, which seems to be where everything goes for Brisbane. So I got this one that I'm using from Maclace Leather. So they're here in Brisbane. For me, they're actually on the way if I go to East Coast Leather, the leather shed, so I can stop in at Maclace. They do a lot of bulk treatments, but they don't really do the bright colours. They're what I'd call for more traditional leather work. So they do a lot of the saddlery stuff, and they do have edge coats, but it's in all the neutral colours that suit people doing that work. They don't have the glitter and the sparkle. Yeah, I'm glad you have trouble too, Marilyn. So I'm going to do a video once I get my hands on this pack and sort of talk through and experiment a little bit so that everyone can sort of, I guess, learn from me messing around and finding out. And yes, I will put the link in the supplier. I'll have to see how all that goes. Or just message me. I'm absolutely fine if you message me and say, who are you talking about? Tell me, and I'll send you all the details. So the base coat. It's really important if you're joining layers together. So it's, thank you, Marilyn. So the base coat is, if you're using a leather that's quite shaggy, it's a really hard sort of, so this kangaroo leather on the suede side, it's got a little bit of suede, but it's not like really furry. So I find just using the edge coat itself is enough to seal it in. But the base coat, what you do is you put that on first, and then you use a little bit of sandpaper to sort of smooth all those raggedy bits down. And then you put the edge coat on top, and you get a really smooth, nice finish. So it's really important if you're joining two layers together. So that's when you're sort of using a bit of glue and a little of that base coat to stick the two layers together build that surface, make it perfectly smooth so you can't tell that the two are stuck together. And then the paint is sort of the prettiness on top. So the base coat is about building that structure to join the edges together so it looks seamless. So I've been eyeing off a Dremel and some Dremel bits for burnishing. I've got the edge coat coming, and I can't wait to get experimenting with that because I think there's a lot of fun stuff that can be done. The other nice thing about doing it this, I'm not going to say dodgy, but not doing the full way is that it's already dried. And you really probably can't even see on camera. I like it that it makes it just, the neutral just darkens it a little bit different. Darkens it different, slow down. It darkens it just a little bit from the main color. But what this also relies on is in tanning. If they're doing a cheap tan, they won't dye the hide the whole way through. If you've ever got a bargain on some leather and it's a light blue color in behind, it's because they've only done the first step of the tanning process. They've just put the color on top. That light blue color is what the hides look like when they're pickled, when they go into the factory. So where it's colored the whole way through, they've spent a little bit more time in the process. And a neutral will just work with that color. Whereas if you've got any that are the white underneath, that's where it can be really good to get the colored edge coating to match the colors or contrast colors. Iridescent one is the one that I'm super excited about, but that's because I love stuff that sparkles. Yeah, I like that raw edge a lot better with the edge coating. I'm going to go get some double-sided tape to hold that in place. I think it will be a challenge if I don't do that. And then I'm all set up with the purple thread to do the sewing across, so I'll do that. And then, so I can either install the turn lock next, or I can sew the lining in so we can see what that looks like. So is there any preference on what I do next? I like this. Choose your own adventure. What I have done is put a line in of I want that to be hidden, just to help me, just a marker. That should get it in as straight as possible too. Turn lock, awesome. What I did want to do with the edge paint is do one of these and actually put the green underneath and the purple leather on top, and then do the iridescent edge finish around. So I might still do another one with that because I think that would look super cool to have that, like a little bit of glitter from the iridescent. Okay, This is definitely one that would probably be easier to do on the Beast because it's a flatbed, but I have the color on here. My stitching did get a little bit funny in there, but I don't think it's super noticeable. And what I'm going to do is feed these threads through to the back. And then I'm going to do another row of stitching across the top, and that will hold that all nicely in place. Some nice long tails. I'm going to pop some rivets in this one as well. Oh, and I've just lost the camera. I will find out what's going on there. I'll have to turn it off and turn it back on again. So I'll flick to my webcam because it looks like my other camera has decided to stop working. So sorry about that. I'm not sure why. I feel like it's overheated, so I might rather than doing the turn lock, I might quickly go through how you would put in the lining just so that if people are watching along, they'll have that bit. And I've turned the camera off, the other camera off. So I might see if maybe leaving it sit for a while might make it a bit happier. If I turn this around. So if you are doing one of these, make sure that it's pushed down and not going to get caught up. And you really want to match all the seams as a starting point. Clip them together. Now, it can be easier sometimes to match those seams if you push one side one way and the other side the other way. You can, oh gosh, that lighting's terrible. I'll try the camera again. I see what it is. My sewing machine light, as well as the window behind me. I don't seem to be able to get that picture looking any good. All right. Yeah, the window is a problem. And I don't have a blind on that window. I can move back to my dookie, which I might do. Just need me in the way of the window. Yeah, I might move it back to the dookie because I do have a blinds on those windows, and I then can sew around the top and at least get the bag to that point where it I think is a sort of a good spot. So let me turn both those off while I move. Maybe moving the camera will make it happy. think if I keep doing videos, I'll have to get a blind for that window so that I can film over there. That was the battery pack on my camera. So it's supposed to plug into the PowerPoint and mean that I don't have to use little batteries that plug in. It failed on me. So I have a battery with a bit of charge, so I might be able to finish this video. Well, that's my camera back. Oh, sorry about that. It was a little bit frustrating. I thought I was being quite clever by getting a pack that plugged in, so I didn't have to worry about charging batteries. But, whoops. So I'm going to use clips for this. And again, it's just lining up the seams on the outside and the inside. So I've got the lining sitting inside. I've got the outside of the bag inside out. And I start by matching those seams. And if you push one seam one way, the other seam the other way, that's a great way to get them to meet. And then in the center panel of both, there's a little bit of a dip. Match that up. Over the side panels can get a little bit tricky. What I like to do is I start in the middle and get that middle area sitting right, because that's sort of the curviest bit. And I find that if it's going to pucker or play up, that will be the spot where it's most likely to do it. So lots of clips. Again, on the other side panel, get that center bit in first. Because of the way that this sits up and over the edge, there is a little bit of extra fabric on the lining when you're sort of doing this step. So slow and steady, take your time. And lots of clips. I've got it fully clipped up. And I'm going to sew it all around now. Just take my Ugg boot off. Make sure I don't knock the tripod. It's not as well set up as it was before, so bear with me. So for some of those corners where the leather is, if your machine's struggling with bulk, you can trim right back along that edge and remove most of the bulk out of that seam. And then for the start and finish of that, if you use a hump jumper, it'll make life a lot easier just to jump up over and get down the other side without the stitches bunching. It's not so bad on joining together, but when you're coming to actually top stitching, definitely want the hump jumper then, because it's just going to keep your stitches a nice even length. So pick any point to start. I generally like to start on one of these side panels, not around anything too tricky. And again, the good thing about using the Juki is it's got the seam allowance marking. That means it will be actually done at 10 centimeters rather than my best guess of 10 centimeters, which I'm pretty good at. But it is easier actually having markings on a machine. This is one seam that you do want to keep fairly consistent because it will notice, because that will be how much fabric peeks over. So what I might do is finish this, and then I might do another video for the turn lock, just a nice short one where I go through both sides, hopefully after I've fixed my equipment failure. I'm just worried that my battery that I've popped into the camera is going to go flat on me. time. This is getting up to one of those seams, so I'm just going to go slowly and carefully. Make sure my seams match nicely. Move some of these clips out of the way. So this is the drum roll moment. This is why I love leaving a big, giant gap in the bottom of the pocket. You know what I didn't do? I didn't open the zipper on the pocket. Never fear. Luckily, those pretty zip pulls don't have a pin on them. I can go through the lining. It gets really tricky if you have a zipper that has one of the locking pins where you actually have to pull. And if you've got thick lining, that's when that's a disaster, but saved. When I'm turning these through, I like to grab these two corners in my hand. So sort of get my thumb around both and then pull that part in and through the pocket. I find that's the easiest way to get it all going, push through. Ha ha ha. Look at that. I love this part. Like you finally get to see what the bag's going to actually look like. Oh, yay! Again, I like to use a lot of clips. It's worth spending just a little bit of time, again, on this, just working that fabric, making sure everything is just sitting as well as it can, clipping it in place. So a couple of minutes spent at this stage will make all the difference when it comes to actually sewing the top stitching around. You don't have to sew the top stitching. It will still function as a bag without it. But the advantage of doing that top stitching step is it helps it sit crisper and neater and flatter. So as much as I'm always a little bit, oh, do I want to? It's worth it. It's kind of like those side seams. So you can see her on the homeward stretch now. So for the top stitching on this, I like sewing on the edge of the fabric. So maybe 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch, right in just on the fabric layers all the way around. So I feel like that gives it a nice finish. You can see, make sure that if you're putting the connector that it's not there. And before you seal up the inside of this, make sure that you pop the strap connectors in, and we'll make the spot here for the turn lock on this. We'll make sure that that's all installed, and then pop the hole in that and make the straps, which I didn't do. It is usually my first step, but I think I'm going to stop it there because I don't know how much battery I will have left, and I would much rather stop at a good point where I can sort of catch up later. And I know I've got a couple of other videos on the channel that will cover bits and pieces in here. So that is my almost finished Admiral Grace bag. So thank you to absolutely everyone that joined in to the live. It's been wonderful having you here, and all going well, this will then become a video on my channel. So if you're watching this after the fact, love that you're here, and drop any questions below. Jump into the Facebook group if you've got questions. I absolutely love getting people sewing bags and getting excited about bags because it is just such a fun and creative thing to do. So, and of course, I think the usual thing on YouTube is you have to say, please like the video and please subscribe, because that is what makes the YouTube algorithm happy. And yeah, thanks everyone.